Throw her out.
The command tore through the morning hall like thunder in the dead of night. Candles trembled, servants froze. Even the portraits upon the walls seemed to stare in horror.
Brother, please.
Her voice shook like a child lost in the dark.
You have no brother here.
Two servants, too frightened to refuse, seized the young lady by her arms. Still dressed in black from the burial of her parents, she was dragged across the marble floor, while whispers spread through the hall like smoke.
One night! Let me remain one night in Mother's chamber. Only one night.
He descended the staircase slowly, each step echoing like judgment. His eyes were cold, unreadable, yet somewhere deep within them lived a fear no one could name.
This house belongs to me now, and you belong nowhere.
The great doors were thrown open, wind screamed through the manor, rain lashed the stone steps. Her trunk was hurled into the darkness after her. Then came the final cruelty. Her late mother's shawl was torn from her shoulders and flung into the mud before the watching town. The iron gates slammed shut. She was outside. He was inside, and everyone believed the matter was finished. But behind locked walls, an old servant trembled beside a hidden key. Beneath the chapel floor, a sealed chest waited in silence. Inside a faded letter, one sentence could destroy a powerful man forever. For the lord who claimed the estate stood upon stolen ground. The blood in his veins carried no right to the name he wore, and the sister he cast into the storm was far more dangerous than she appeared. Before dawn, the first crack would appear in the walls of his perfect lie. How did a brother become his sister's greatest enemy? Why did the bed leave secrets buried in stone? And who was the shadow watching from the road that night? Stay with me as we return to where it all began. And before we begin, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And if you love stories of betrayal, hidden truths, and glorious revenge, subscribe now for more unforgettable tales. The Hawthorne estate had never known a silence so heavy. Only 3 nights earlier, every corridor had been filled with shouting footsteps, slammed doors, and desperate prayers as Duke Frederick Hawthorne fought for breath in his chamber. The old Duke had returned from inspecting flooded tenant farms in a bitter storm, soaked to the bone and burning with fever by morning. Though physicians were summoned from town, their powders and leeches did little. He weakened quickly, his once commanding voice reduced to a rasp. Duchess Helena Hawthorne had not left his bedside for a moment. She held cool cloths to his brow, read scripture beside the fire, and refused sleep. When the Duke finally breathed his last just before dawn, the Duchess let out one broken cry, clutched her chest, and collapsed beside the bed. Before the church bells finished tolling for one death, they rang for 2. Now black crape hung from every window of the manor. Mirrors were covered in mourning cloth. Candles burned low in silver stands, filling the halls with the scent of wax and smoke. Servants moved quietly in black uniforms, their eyes swollen from grief and exhaustion. In the kitchens, untouched pies had gone cold, loaves of bread remained uncut, and trays of spiced broth sat forgotten. No one had appetite for food in a house where both master and mistress were gone. Lady Adelaide Cromwell stood near the entrance hall fireplace, still numb from sorrow. She wore a plain black gown, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly before her. She had not yet entered her mother's room since the burial. The thought of seeing the empty bed was more pain than she could bear. She only wanted one final night beneath the roof where she had been born. Across the hall, Lord Charles Wensley showed no sign of mourning beyond the black ribbon tied carelessly to his sleeve. He stood tall beneath the grand staircase, already dressed as though receiving guests rather than burying parents. Beside him lingered several town men, eager to flatter whoever now held power. Charles raised a glass of wine he had ordered from the cellar only moments after returning from the graveyard. "My father is dead," he announced loudly, "and with his passing, this estate now answers to me." The gathered men bowed their heads and murmured approval. Some servants lowered their eyes in discomfort. Adelaide stepped forward. "Charles, this is not the hour for such talk." He turned slowly, a thin smile on his lips. "It is exactly the hour. Weakness waits, power does not." She stared at him, hardly recognizing the brother she had grown beside. "We have just buried them." "And buried confusion with them," he replied. "There will be order now." He looked toward the servants. "Lady Adelaide will leave this house before nightfall." The hall gasped. One maid dropped a tray, sending spoons across the marble floor. Adelaide's voice trembled. "Leave? Charles, I ask for nothing. Let me remain one night only. I wish to sleep in Mother's chamber and grieve." He laughed openly. "Grieve wherever women grieve best, away from matters of inheritance." Tears filled her eyes. "This is my home. This is my estate," he snapped.
Women are burdens to be married off, not heirs to be obeyed.
He snatched the bell cord and ordered 2 footmen forward. They hesitated until he shouted again. Adelaide's small trunk was carried from the stairs and hurled through the open doorway into the rain-soaked courtyard. Clothes spilled into the mud. Then Charles stepped close, tore the soft wool shawl from her shoulders, very mother's shawl she had wrapped around her after the funeral, and flung it after the trunk. "Out!" The footman, ashamed, guided Adelaide toward the doors. She stumbled onto the wet stone steps as rain lashed her face. Behind her, the iron gates of the estate groaned shut. From an upstairs window, old Nurse Miriam pressed trembling fingers to the glass. "Forgive me, child. The wrong heir stands inside." Adelaide sank beside her overturned trunk in the mud, grief and shock stealing her strength. Her vision blurred. As she collapsed near the gate, a dark carriage waiting beneath the elm trees remained still, its hidden passenger watching everything in silence. Morning came grey and bitter over the village of Hawthorne. Rainwater still clung to the cobbled lanes, gathering in shallow puddles that reflected chimneys and crooked roofs. Lady Adelaide Cromwell walked slowly through the narrow street, with mud dried upon the hem of her black gown. Her trunk was scratched, one clasp broken, and her hands were red from cold. She had spent the last hours beneath a stone arch near the estate wall, shivering through the dark, while memories of her parents' funeral and Charles's laughter tormented her. Shopkeepers lifting shutters recognized her at once. A baker's wife covered her mouth in shock. A butcher's boy lowered his eyes in pity. An old flower seller reached for a small bunch of late roses, then quickly drew back when she saw 2 of Charles's men passing on horseback. Sympathy lived in many faces, yet fear ruled their hands. No one wished to invite the anger of the new master. Adelaide paused outside the bakery as warm scents of fresh bread and cinnamon drifted into the street. Hunger twisted painfully within her, but pride kept her silent. She turned away before tears could fall. A quiet voice spoke behind her. "My lady, if you please." A middle-aged inn servant stood there, cap in hand. Behind him waited the same dark carriage she had seen through blurred eyes before fainting at the gate. Its curtain remained closed. "The Rose and Lantern has prepared a room for you," the servant said gently. "A fire has been lit. Breakfast waits." Adelaide stared in confusion. "Who has sent this kindness?" "My master requests only your comfort," the man replied. "He gives no name." Too tired to refuse, she followed him through the lane to a modest inn tucked between a tailor and a cooper's yard. The room upstairs was simple but clean, with white linen sheets, a wash basin, and a small grate fire snapping warmly. On the table sat oat porridge with cream, soft bread, plum jam, boiled eggs, and tea scented with bergamot. Adelaide's lips trembled at the sight of such care. She whispered thanks, though no benefactor was present to hear it. At Hawthorne Estate, kindness had no place that morning. Charles strode through the halls with ledgers beneath his arm and greed in his eyes. He dismissed 3 widowed maids before luncheon, saying sorrow made women slow. He ordered the silver candelabras packed for sale, along with paintings, clocks, and a carved walnut cabinet the late Duchess had treasured. When the steward protested that these were family possessions, Charles threatened to dismiss him as well. By afternoon, Lady Millicent Vale arrived in a plum riding coat trimmed with fur. She toured the drawing-room as though already mistress of it, tapping furniture with her gloves and declaring which carpets offended her taste. Charles promised her a wedding before the season ended. She smiled only when jewels were mentioned. Old Nurse Miriam watched all of this with rising sickness in her heart. She had bathed both infants, soothed both fevers, and buried too many secrets in silence. Now she could bear no more. That evening she slipped from the manor by the servants' path and made her way to the Rose and Lantern. Adelaide opened the door herself, her eyes swollen yet composed. "Miriam." The old woman entered, removed her wet shawl, and took Adelaide's hands. Child, I have wronged you with silence. She told the story in a shaking voice. Years ago, Duke Frederick's younger sister, Lady Eleanor, lost her husband in a carriage overturning while heavy with child. 2 days after Adelaide was born, Eleanor died, bringing a son into the world. The Duchess, moved by grief and pity, placed the orphan beside her own daughter and swore he would be raised as equal blood, never knowing shame. That boy was Charles, Miriam said. Adelaide stepped back as if struck. No, it cannot be. It can and it is. She wept openly now. Then why was I cast out? Because mercy raised him, but greed made him. Adelaide sank into a chair, her whole life shifting beneath her feet. Miriam leaned close and lowered her voice. Proof still exists, my lady. Adelaide looked up through tears. The nursemaid glanced toward the shuttered window, hidden where no man would search.
Several days passed, and the village that had once only pitied Lady Adelaide Cromwell began to know her. Though she owned little more than 2 dresses, a comb, and the small room at the Rose and Lantern, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of one born to better halls. Each morning she tied back her hair, rolled her sleeves, and asked where she might be useful. She mended torn coats for labourers whose wives could not sew. She repaired stockings beside the inn window with neat, patient hands, while children gathered to watch the needle move. She read letters aloud for old men whose eyes had dimmed with age, speaking slowly so they could hear words sent by sons working in distant towns. She wrote replies for widows who could not hold a pen steady enough for their grief. When a mother fell ill, Adelaide spent half the night rocking a feverish child until the little boy slept. She asked no coin from any of them. Soon, warm loaves, apples, broth, and jars of honey began appearing at the inn door. The baker's wife sent sweet buns glazed with sugar. The butcher's boy delivered a parcel of lamb bones for soup. Even those who had turned away in fear now bowed respectfully when she passed. They had feared Charles because he held power. They loved Adelaide because she gave kindness. The mysterious stranger continued to visit, though never with display. Sometimes a hamper of fresh fruit arrived. Sometimes coal was delivered for her fire. Once, when heavy rain flooded the lane, a pair of sturdy boots appeared outside her chamber door, sized exactly for her feet. At last he came himself in daylight. He entered the inn parlour dressed in a dark riding coat, rain still glistening on the shoulders. He was broad-shouldered, composed, and carried the ease of a man accustomed to command. Yet his eyes held warmth rather than pride. "I owe you thanks," Adelaide said carefully. "You have aided me more than I deserve." "You deserved far more than you received," he answered. He introduced himself as Lord Nathaniel Evermere, master of the neighbouring Evermere lands.
Adelaide knew the name at once. His family's estates bordered her father's for generations. "I respected Duke Frederick greatly," Nathaniel said. "He was fair to his tenants and honest in trade. When I saw what was done to his daughter, I could not ignore it." Emotion tightened her throat. "Then I thank you in my father's memory." They spoke over tea and buttered bread in the small parlor. Nathaniel listened more than he spoke. Adelaide noticed that unlike most noblemen, he never once treated her misfortune as weakness. At Hawthorne Estate, word of Adelaide's growing favor reached Charles by supper. The steward mentioned villagers praising her charity. A maid carelessly said the inn had never been so busy. Charles slammed his wineglass against the hearth, shattering crystal across the carpet. "She is nothing," he snarled, "a cast-off woman living on scraps." Lady Millicent Vale, lounging in silk near the fire, smiled thinly. "Then remind them of it. Crush sympathy before it grows into loyalty." Charles paced like a hound, scenting blood. "Yes, let them see what becomes of those who oppose me." He sent 4 estate men at once, with orders to seize the inn, throw Adelaide into the street, and warn any villager who sheltered her. Evening had fallen by the time the riders reached the Rose and Lantern. Rain tapped softly against the shutters. Adelaide stood near the hearth, helping the innkeeper's daughter practice reading from a worn storybook. The door burst open. Mud-spattered men entered, carrying Charles's authority like weapons. "You are ordered out," the first barked, "by command of Lord Charles Wensley." Before Adelaide could speak, another voice answered from beside the window. "Then Lord Charles has exceeded himself." Lord Nathaniel Evermere stepped from the shadows, calm and immovable. They recognized him instantly. His lands were larger than Charles's. His influence reached magistrates, merchants, and parliament men alike. Nathaniel's gaze hardened. "Tell Charles he has just sent threats into a house under my protection." The men backed away, pale and speechless. As they fled into the night, Adelaide's heart sunk with a new dread. Charles had just insulted a man far more powerful than himself. The message Lord Nathaniel Evermere sent to Hawthorne Estate was returned before the hour ended, carried by a breathless groom and sealed with Charles's crest. Nathaniel broke it open beside the inn fire, while Adelaide watched in silence. He laughed once without amusement and handed her the paper. In sharp strokes, Charles had written that no neighboring lord, however rich, could command him. Hawthorne Estate answered to its rightful master alone. Any further interference would be treated as trespass. "He is a fool," Nathaniel said quietly. "He has always mistaken noise for strength," Adelaide replied, though fear stirred beneath her calm. Outside, the wind rose hard against the shutters. Before midnight, old Nurse Miriam arrived wrapped in a dark cloak, carrying a lantern with the flame turned low. "It must be tonight, before he sells more, before he destroys what remains." They crossed the manor grounds by the rear orchard, where bare branches clawed at the sky. Rain-soaked earth clung to their boots. The chapel stood apart from the house, old stone silvered by moonlight, its small bell tower leaning slightly with age. Adelaide had not entered it since childhood prayers beside her mother. Miriam lifted a worn iron ring hidden behind the altar rail. A slab of stone shifted with a groan, revealing steps descending into blackness. Cold air rose from below. Nathaniel took the lantern and went first. Adelaide followed, her pulse beating hard in her throat. The crypt beneath was narrow and lined with old family vaults, their names fading from marble. At the far wall stood a cedar chest bound in tarnished brass, sealed with wax long cracked by time. Miriam sank to her knees. I prayed never to open it. Nathaniel broke the rusted clasp. Inside lay bundles wrapped in silk gone yellow with age. There were parish baptism records tied with ribbon, a folded letter bearing the Duchess's hand, a gold wedding ring set with a small pearl, and legal papers marked with signatures and witnesses. Nathaniel examined the records first. Adelaide, daughter of Frederick and Helena Hawthorne. He lifted the next page. Charles, son of Lady Eleanor Wensley, sister to the Duke. Adelaide's breath caught. Miriam pressed her face into her hands. Nathaniel opened the legal papers. They named Charles as nephew and ward of the household, to be raised in comfort, but without inheritance over lawful issue. With trembling fingers, Adelaide unfolded her mother's letter. The ink had faded, yet every word remained clear. If sorrow should ever divide this house, remember why we chose mercy. Raise him kindly, but when truth is needed, protect my daughter. Tears spilled down Adelaide's cheeks onto the page. She kissed the signature at the bottom and held the letter to her chest. She knew. She missed this day. She prepared for it, Nathaniel answered. By dawn's approach, he had already sent riders in 4 directions. Magistrates were summoned from town. 2 neighboring gentlemen were called as witnesses. The parish rector was ordered to bring registry books. At Hawthorne Estate, lamps still burned in Millicent Vale's chamber. She moved quickly, stuffing velvet cases of jewels into travelling trunks, while her maid wrapped silver hair combs in linen. Do not ask questions, just pack. She had no intention of sinking with a ruined man. As the first pale light touched the manor windows, hoofbeats thundered into the courtyard. A town officer stepped inside, carrying an official summons. Lord Charles Wensley was ordered to appear before the whole town at sunrise. By sunrise, the square before Hawthorne Estate was crowded shoulder to shoulder. Tradesmen left their stalls unopened. Maids stood with aprons still tied. Farmers came in muddy boots, and ladies in travelling cloaks leaned from carriages to witness the spectacle. A long table had been placed near the iron gates for the magistrates and witnesses. The morning air was sharp, carrying the smell of wet earth and chimney smoke. Lord Charles Wensley arrived from the manor in a dark coat trimmed with silver buttons, walking as though the estate itself bowed beneath his steps. He glanced at the crowd with open contempt and took his place before the table. "This insult will cost dearly," he declared. "I am master here." No one answered him. Lady Adelaide Cromwell stood beside Lord Nathaniel Evermere a short distance away. She wore a plain dove-grey gown borrowed from the innkeeper's wife, yet she seemed more noble than anyone present. Though pale from recent hardship, her back was straight and her eyes steady. The chief magistrate broke the wax seals and began to read. First came the parish records. Adelaide, lawful daughter of Duke Frederick Hawthorne and Duchess Helena Hawthorne. Then Charles, born to Lady Eleanor Wensley, younger sister to the Duke, and entered into the household after her death. Murmurs rippled through the square. Next came the guardianship papers, signed years earlier by witnesses now present. Charles was to be raised in comfort and honor as family, but without claim above lawful issue. Gasps spread like fire through dry grass. Charles's face drained of color. "He's a forgery," he shouted. "Lies purchased by jealous enemies." The rector stepped forward with the original church ledger. The ink, the dates, the signatures all matched. Then Adelaide's mother's letter was read aloud. Many wept hearing the words of a dead duchess asking mercy for an orphan child, while warning that her daughter must be protected if truth were ever needed. Charles staggered back as though struck. His claim died there before every eye. Millicent Vale, dressed richly in plum silk, stepped from the manor doorway. Charles turned toward her desperately. "Millicent, speak! Tell them who I am!" She lifted her chin. "A man who misled me." Her voice carried clearly. "I never loved you. I admired the estate." Laughter and shock burst through the crowd. Without another glance, she climbed into her waiting carriage, taking her trunks and jewels with her. Charles spun toward the servants at the gate. "Seize these papers! Remove them all!" No one moved. The steward looked away. Footmen stood like statues. Maids who once trembled now watched him with cold satisfaction. At a nod of the magistrate, the gates were drawn wide. The same gates Charles had slammed against his sister only days before now opened in full honor. Adelaide walked forward slowly over the gravel drive. The servants bowed as she passed. Some were openly crying. She entered not as an outcast, but as rightful mistress of Hawthorne Estate. Charles dropped to his knees in the dirt, clutching at the hem of her gown. "Adelaide, forgive me. I was angry. I was misled. Do not cast me out." She looked down at him calmly, the morning light touching her face. "You called kindness weakness. Now learn what mercy costs." She turned to the magistrates. "He shall receive a small cottage on the North Lane, enough food for 1 season, and nothing more." The crowd roared approval. Nathaniel stepped beside her, removed one glove, and bowed deeply. "Lady Adelaide, you have shown grace in suffering and dignity in victory. If ever you would allow it, I ask for your hand." A hush fell, then cheers rose louder than before. Adelaide smiled for the first time since her parents died. "I will consider it kindly, my lord." Laughter warmed the square. Bells began ringing from the chapel tower as though the estate itself rejoiced. Yet later, while old trunks were being carried from the attic, Nurse Miriam discovered one final sealed letter in the Duchess's hand, marked only with Adelaide's name and the words, "To be opened when all is restored." So, the sister cast into the cold returned in honor, while the brother, who worshipped power, learned that stolen crowns never last. But what